Ladies and gentlemen, the Australian Grand Prix was this past weekend, and boy, do we have some things we need to chat about. We saw some absolutely wild things. It was a race that went from potentially very exciting to very boring to very exciting to even more exciting. They have a lot to talk about. We're going to go through it. But first, if you like Formula One content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button down below. We do a lot of Formula One content on this channel, both in real life as well as in the Formula One video game. So if you are an F1 fan, hit that subscribe button, join the community. But for now, let's go ahead. Let's talk about the Australian Grand Prix. First things first, qualifying usually is the beginning of the race weekend. For a lot of people, it's the first time we get to see the cars out on these specific circuits in anger, trying to set the fastest times possible. And we had some actually very surprising results come out of Australia. I don't think any more wild and strange than seeing one Sergio Perez going off on the first lap of Q1 into the gravel, beached and out of qualifying. And I think I speak for a lot of us when I say I did not have that happening. I think all of us were very shocked and appalled that even though he had been having brake issues all weekend long, all throughout the practice sessions, it was not I don't think many of us had him going out of Q1 on his first lap of qualifying on our bingo cards. So other news around qualifying is Mercedes. Mercedes basically came to play, and is Mercedes on the move? You know, we haven't seen too many, components come for the W14 in its current iteration. We've heard a lot of talk about, what this W14 is going to be looking like soon and how all of these problems they have. And all of a sudden, you get to Melbourne, and all of a sudden Mercedes qualifies P2 and P3. George Russell out qualifying Lewis for the third time in as many races this season, but it is a double Mercedes top three in qualifying. And even then, Fernando Alonso just didn't seem to have the same pace, and for some reason, somehow, Mercedes came to play. On the flip side of that, though, you have Ferrari. I mean, I don't know. I've only been following Formula One for so long. I've only been following Formula One for about a year at this point. And so my only experience with Ferrari is last season, where they finished second in the Constructors' Championship. Charles Leclerc finishes second in the Drivers' Championship. And here they come to Melbourne with their entire fan base waiting, begging them to figure it out and take a step forward. Carlos Sainz out qualifies Charles Leclerc. Carlos finishing in P5, Charles in P7 behind Lance Stroll, who splits the Ferraris. I don't know what it is going on about the SF23, but Ferrari better figure it out quickly, or else, man, Aston Martin and Mercedes are going to be leaving them in the dust. And so, realistically, our final standings for qualifying: Max Verstappen takes pole position, followed by George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, respectively, Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc, Alex Albon. We need to take a moment and appreciate the Williams W that came through in qualifying in Australia, as Alexander Albon demanded respect. What an absolutely fantastic day for Albon, and absolutely set up a monstrous race Sunday for the squad. But as they say, qualifying only leads to the race, so we'll talk about that right now. Our rapid fire race results: we had a great start for Mercedes off of the line as the lights went out. George Russell getting in front of Max Verstappen, not but a corner or so in, having that inside line. A fantastic start from Russell on that one. Following up the first corner, Lewis Hamilton ends up getting by Max Verstappen. Max ended up braking extremely early going into turn 3, and so Lewis was able to get a very nice move done on the inside and get past the Red Bull as well. And actually, it was a Mercedes 1-2 for more than a few laps. Another victim in the lap 1 craziness of Australia was one Charles Leclerc, going into the infamous now, I think, turn 3 at Australia. Claimed many victims this weekend. Charles tries to make a bit of an aggressive move to try and get by the 2 or at least 1 of the Aston Martins and Lance Stroll. Unfortunately, trying to go 3 wide into a turn where 3 rarely goes into 1. Lance just taps Charles just enough to spin the Ferrari around and ends up going backwards into the gravel pit, and Charles also out of the Australian Grand Prix on lap 1. It was absurd, the amount of things that happened in this race that seemed to get swept under the rug. It's crazy that this might have been one of the more forgettable incidents that happened in this one, as especially the way the race continued on and the race ended, that this really was probably the least memorable results, the DNF, we can say, of Australia. As the race continued, we managed to get a few more laps in of a Mercedes 1-2 before, unfortunately, our qualifying hero of the weekend, Alex Albon, loses control at the beginning of sector 2 and puts it into the wall and sprays a metric boatload of gravel across the circuit, preempting a safety car to come out, in which many drivers opt to take a cheap pit stop this early in the race to get onto the hard tires, expecting to go to the end. A handful of drivers end up staying out, which would have given us, I think, a very interesting prospect going down going down towards the midpoint of this race, seeing a lot of alternate strategies as well as original strategies potentially colliding, giving us some very interesting running before the FIA and the stewards determined that there was just far too much gravel, and we got our first red flag of the day as the drivers all make their way into the pits. They pretty much all make their way onto a hard set of tires, and the plan was from there to go to the end on those hard tires, and I think it set up a bit of a snoozer, to say a little bit, where once it all sort of shook out, Max Verstappen ends up getting by Lewis Hamilton about as easy of an overtake that I think he could potentially manage. That Red Bull is a rocket ship in a straight line, and I think from there we got probably about 30-ish laps of pretty much everyone kind of keeping form, everyone just kind of making their way to the end. And I think we all thought it was going to come down to who potentially could save their tires enough to potentially make a bit of a dash at the end, but it definitely turned into more of a race management sort of situation over an actual race situation. But that is until Kevin Magnussen saves the day, I believe on lap 53 of 58, puts it into the wall on the exit of turn 2, just gets a little too close, taps the wall, and another safety car, and eventually our second red flag of the day. Everyone into the pits, soft tires go on, and we are going to have only a few laps of a shootout to try and determine the finishing order here in Australia. And this is the moment where everyone on a fresh set of, or at least a newer set of soft tires and 2 laps, no DRS, to try and win a race. I think everyone sensed that the win was basically up for grabs. Whoever could make it in the lead at the beginning would definitely be putting themselves into a position to win the race. And what ended up happening was, I believe by my counts, 5 more DNFs. We had, starting from the order of probably least important to most important, we had Logan Sargent absolutely careen into the back of Nick DeVries into turn 1, pushing both of them into the gravel, both of them out. Going into and out of turn 1, we had Carlos Sainz tapping Fernando Alonso, spinning Fernando around, effectively ending his race, even though he ended up able to continue on. As we make our way out of the carnage that was turn 1, you had the 2 Alpines come together, and unfortunately the pink car, it was no more, either of them in fact, as both Ocon and Gasly get tangled up into each other, into the wall, and both of their races were also finished in that moment. Continuing on towards turn 3, we have Lance Stroll deciding to go straight on This was probably my favorite moment, realistically, of the restart, the final restart, where Lance Stroll makes it through, makes up many positions, and instead of turning right, goes straight at a right-hander and ends up having to make his way through the gravel pit. On the carnage on the other side, we end up getting a safety car and effectively an almost, immediate red flag, as there are many vehicles crashed out of this one, and unfortunately that effectively ended the race. The only questions left were what was going to be the restart order for the finish, because the lap results may not have counted, the lap itself did count, and so the restart would be the formation lap for the restart would be the final lap, and so it all came down to who was going to be in what position for the final restart. There was a Haas moment where we potentially were looking at a Nico Hülkenberg podium as he made his way through in P4, and with Carlos Sainz likely getting a penalty, which he ended up getting, it would have promoted Hulk into the podium, but unfortunately they went back to the original restart order, sans all of the drivers who are now out. And so with 12 drivers on the grid, they make their formation lap in succession. The race results are as follows. Max Verstappen wins the Australian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso occupy the second and third steps of the podium. Lance Stroll 4th, Sergio Perez 5th, Lando Norris 6th, Nico Hülkenberg 7th, Oscar Piastri scoring points in his home debut. Zhou Guanyu and Yuki Tsunoda round out the top 10, with Valtteri Bottas and Carlos Sainz coming home to wrap up in 12th position, with 8 other cars not finishing the race. What a race, what a crazy race, to say the least. But unfortunately, I think the biggest loser of the final results, besides Alpine, who decided to crash each other out, is Carlos Sainz, who get a 5-second penalty, which was enforced at the line. So he ended up dropping from P4 to P12, finishing last of those who did. All right, it's time now for our weekend winners and our weekend losers. And for our winners, I'm choosing Mercedes. I think even with George's mechanical failure after the first red flag restart, he showed some pace that I don't think we've seen from a Mercedes, specifically race pace that we've seen from them at all, either this year or last year. And so I think it was very impressive. I think Lewis was able to also kind of get a lot out of his Mercedes, out of that W14 throughout the entire race. I mean, he was able to hold off the gap to Fernando Alonso, to not allow Alonso to be able to attack him down the stretch. As it was seeming, every time Alonso seemed to push, Lewis seemed to always be able to put out, another, 4 to 5 tenths to reintroduce that gap and not allow Fernando into his DRS range pretty much for, I mean, we were looking like 20 something odd laps. Obviously it wasn't enough to hang with Max, but I mean, very few cars out there are, if any, definitely none. And so I think my weekend winner is Mercedes. Now on the flip side of that same coin, our weekend loser, and I don't think this is too much of a shocker, but I've gone for Ferrari. Charles being taken out lap 1, Carlos with his 5-second penalty after the final red flag restart, tapping Fernando Alonso and spinning him out. Even though the results of those incidents in that lap were effectively reset, the stewards give Carlos a 5-second penalty on basically a formation lap finish, which ended up dropping him all the way out of the points. And so after 3 rounds of the season, Ferrari has regressed so far from how they finished last year. Carlos drove a fantastic race, but unfortunately just right at the end made one mistake and completely unravels his entire weekend in not but a moment. So those are my winners and losers from the weekend. All right, and as for our official predictions made in our Australian Grand Prix predictions video, let's go through them one by one and see how we did. Our biggest positive surprise, I said and predicted that Logan Sargent was going to score his first points in his Formula One career, and that is a resounding negative. It definitely did not happen. his day really just never really panned out. Even in a Williams that showed a lot of promise around Australia, he just never really seemed to be able to extract, really extract the performance that Albon was. And then it kind of all culminated on the last red flag restart, where he punted Nick DeVries into the shadow realm. And as for our biggest negative surprise, our biggest disappointment, I had McLaren not scoring any points once again around Australia. I even threw in a qualifier saying that it wouldn't even be particularly close, and once again proven doubly wrong, because not only did McLaren score points, they had a double points finish, with Lando Norris coming home to finish 6th and Oscar Piastri finishing 8th, getting his first points of his F1 career. And so I am a very resounding 0 for 2 so far in my predictions for Australia, but I think that's going to all change coming up for the next one. For qualifying, my top 3 were Max taking pole position. That's a point. Put it on the board. Unfortunately, I had Sergio Perez coming home and finishing P2 in qualifying, so that's 1 thumbs down. And in P3, I had 1 Charles Leclerc. So I got 1 for 3 out of qualifying results. And so I'm not giving myself a double thumbs down. I'm just giving myself a, hey, you got pole position right. And then as for race results, it's going to go a very similar route as I had Max winning, Checo in P2 and Charles Leclerc in P3. So once again, not a double thumbs down, but at the same time, it is at least we got 1 right. Of course, it might be the one everyone was predicting, but we take those where we can get them. This weekend did not go great for me in terms of predictions, but you know what did go great for me? You know what did go great? This channel is a Haas channel, if you see the F1 Manager series, and so I made a bold prediction for Haas. 2 cars into Q2. Check and check. 1 car into Q3. Thank you, Nico Hülkenberg. And at least 1 car in the points. That's 3 for 3 on Haas predictions for the Australian Grand Prix. And so even though I had a terrible predictions session for Australia as a whole, we got the Haas predictions 100% correct. And in my books and my eyes, that's all that matters. Baku is up next in a month. And so we have a long way to go. There'll be a lot of discussion about the results of Australia. You can keep an eye on this channel in particular. I have a couple of ideas of other videos to talk about, kind of the things to help fill the void over the month until the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. But with that said, that's going to wrap up our post-Australian Grand Prix video. Our predictions went bad. The race was good and entertaining, to say the least. But what did you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, if you enjoy Formula 1 content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from me. I try and upload every day during the week. But for now, I think that's going to do it for us here, and I'll see you in the next one.